Welcome everyone to the next video. Today we'll be looking at eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. We need to know the similarities, the differences, how to identify them from a picture, and sometimes you'll be given an unknown cell and you'll have to find whether it's a prokaryote or a eukaryote. So let's just double check we know what prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells are first. So simply put, prokaryotes or prokaryotic cells are bacteria. So any bacteria are prokaryotes. And eukaryotes are plants, animals, and fungus. There's a few more in there, but for GCSE, this is what we need to know. Okay, so if you're not sure which is which, very quickly pause the video and jot these down. Okay, well done. Right, with that in mind, we need to be able to look at a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell and identify which is which. And there's a few things that we're looking for here. So I've got a diagram here. This one is a typical prokaryote cell, so a typical bacteria cell. And this one is a typical eukaryote cell. So this could be a plant or an animal. It looks like an animal because it hasn't got any chloroplasts. So if you're given these and you're not told which is which, we're looking for a few things. The first thing to look at is the nucleus. Okay, so the nucleus here has a membrane around the outside and all the DNA is in the middle. Whereas in a prokaryotic cell, the DNA is just floating around in the cytoplasm. That's our first clue. Our second clue are these little beasts here, these mitochondria. So we'll have mitochondria in a eukaryotic cell, but they're too big to fit into a prokaryotic cell. So there will be no mitochondria. There are ribosomes. You can see these little blue dots. They're in both, but no mitochondria. So that's two little clues to look for if you're not sure whether it's a prokaryotic cell or a eukaryotic cell. The nucleus and where the DNA is, and then looking to see if there's any mitochondria. Right. So the differences between these two cells. So I've mentioned the nucleus and I've mentioned the mitochondria. Prokaryotic cells are a lot smaller. It doesn't show it too well on this slide, but they are tiny, tiny things. So we'll have a look at the relative sizes in a minute. So if you want to write down these differences and similarities, let's have a look. So the word prokaryote we can use for prokaryotic organisms. So a bacteria is a prokaryote, or we can say prokaryotic cells. Okay, as long as you've got prokaryotes, it's fine. So prokaryotic organisms are unicellular. That means they're one cell. Remember, this is the bacteria, and these are our characteristics, how we would identify them. They're very small. They have no mitochondria. They have no nucleus or nuclear membrane, which is that membrane around the outside of the nucleus. They have DNA free in the cytoplasm. It's just swimming around. And they also have plasmids, which are tiny, tiny rings of DNA. So some examples are here. E. coli, that's probably one you may have heard of, which can cause food poisoning. You may have heard of strep throat. Streptococcus causes strep throat. And there's another one here, staphylococcus. Now, you do not need to remember these. This is just for interest to give you some examples. So if you need to write that down, pause the video now. Okay, so let's have a look at eukaryotes. Now, if you remember, eukaryotes are plants, animals, and fungus. So we can say eukaryotic organisms, which are plants, animals, and fungus, or we can talk about the cells in eukaryotes. So eukaryotic organisms are multicellular. They have many cells, We're eukaryotes. Any plants are eukaryotes. So they are larger. They have a nucleus or nuclear membrane around the DNA. And they have other membrane-bound organelles. Now, that sounds difficult, but organelles are just all those little bits that are inside of a cell. And membrane-bound just means they've got a membrane around the outside, something like a mitochondria. And if you remember, mitochondria are actually too big to fit inside a bacterial cell, so we won't find them in prokaryotes, but we always find them in eukaryotes. And here's our examples: plants, animals, fungus, paramecium. Don't really need to know that one, just there for interest. Right, so let's have a look at the sizes, because when we looked at our cells, they're both similar size. So this is kind of a size line, if you like. So down this end, we've got the atom, and all the way up this end, we've got an adult female, and then we've got all these measurements in between. So plant cells and animal cells here, they fit in between the 10 micrometers and 100 micrometers category. So they're around that size. That little U with a tail is actually called mu, and it represents micrometer. Or some people say micrometer. It's the same thing. And if we look down here, bacteria, they fit around the 1 micrometer mark. And if we look at the size of the mitochondria, it's not going to fit in a bacterial cell. Just for interest, the viruses are even smaller than bacteria. They're down here. And if we look at the bottom, and we'll do this more in the microscope video, with a light microscope, which are the ones that you use in your lab, we can see these sizes from 1 millimeter down to about 1 micrometer. Yours probably only go up to times 50 though, so we're probably chopping off here somewhere. If we want to see most of the bacteria, viruses, or anything else, we're going to be using an electron microscope. But like I said, that comes up more in our microscope video. So that gives you an idea of the sizes. So what we're going to do is have a little look at an exam question. So here is our exam question, and we've got 3 cells here. Now this will tell you how important it is to make sure you read everything. So we've got a bacterial cell here. Now instantly it's bacterial cells, so we should know it's a prokaryote. But if we don't, let's look at the DNA. It's floating around in the cytoplasm, and we've got these little plasmids here. Okay, so we know that that's a bacterial cell. A liver cell, well, humans, animals have liver, so we can assume this is an animal cell. And if we're not sure, we can find the nucleus. It's got a membrane around it, so we know it's a eukaryote. And the same with a mesophyll cell. It's got a membrane around it, so we know that it's a eukaryote. A mesophyll cell is actually in a plant, but if you didn't know that, you can still see that it's a eukaryote from the nucleus. Now, important we check the sizes here. Bacterial cell, 1 micrometer. Liver cell, 30 micrometers. And a mesophyll cell, 0.05 millimeters. So we've got a different unit here. And that comes up in our 3rd question because we have to do a calculation. But for now, just be aware that we've got the measurements, but they're different in different units. So let's have a quick look at this first question. Give 2 similarities between the prokaryotic cell and the eukaryotic cell. So I'll put the picture back up for you. 2 similarities. So prokaryote, eukaryote, eukaryote. So pause the video and see if you can find 2 similarities. Okay, this is 2 marks, but there's actually 4 possible marks here. So the first one is they both have cell membranes. Okay, so all of them have a cell membrane, although the plant and the bacteria have a cell wall as well. They all have a cell membrane. That could be one mark. They all have cytoplasm. That could be another mark. They all have DNA. Okay, even though this is in a nucleus and this one isn't, they still all have DNA. And the last possible one is they all have ribosomes. These tiny little black dots are ribosomes. So 4 possible marks there. I have got the mark scheme on a slide in a minute, so we'll double check in a second. Okay, let's have a look at the next question. Give 3 differences between the prokaryotic cell and the eukaryotic cell. Now, although we've got diagrams of them, you should know the differences, though it should overlap quite a lot here. So, differences. If you want to, pause the video and have a go, see what differences you can find. Okay. So, when they write mark schemes, they tend to, for this one, certainly, they've written it from the point of view of the bacterial cell. So they've mentioned everything about the bacterial cell, but if you say the opposite, that is fine. So, for example, the prokaryote is smaller because we've got the measurements down here. But if you said the eukaryotes are bigger, that's fine. Okay, the prokaryote has no mitochondria, and by now you probably know why, because it won't fit inside. So that's possibly number 2. The prokaryote has no nucleus, or the DNA is floating in the cytoplasm. That would be the 3rd mark. And the last one, the prokaryote has plasmids, which are these circular bits of DNA. Okay, so that's 4 differences there. So let's just double check, make sure you've got all those marks. Okay, so here's a mark scheme. First one was similarities. Both have ribosomes or a cell membrane or cytoplasm or DNA. We only need 2 of those. Those are 2 marks. The second part was differences. So from a bacterial cell, it's smaller, has no mitochondria, no nucleus, and has plasmids. Okay, that is 3 marks. You can take it from the eukaryote and say a eukaryote is larger, eukaryote has mitochondria, eukaryote has a nucleus, eukaryote doesn't have plasmids. Okay, it doesn't matter which way around you do it, as long as you do it. Okay, now let's go back to the 3rd part of the question because there's a calculation. Okay, right, so this 3rd part of the question, we're going to do this one. Calculate the ratio of the size of the bacterial cell to the size of the mesophyll cell. Now, in the beginning, I said they're in different units. So what we need to do is go back to the question and just double check the sizes. Okay, so if you're not sure what they are, let's have a look. Bacterial cell, 1 micrometer, but mesophyll cell, 0.05 millimeters. So jot those 2 measurements down, and then we're going to have a look how we're going to work that out. Right, so I'm going to guide you through this answer. It asked us for a ratio of the sizes. So you should have written down bacterial cell is 1 micrometer or micrometer, and the mesophyll cell is 0.05 millimeters. For us to do a ratio of sizes, we need to have them in the same units. So before we can compare, let's change the 0.05 millimeters to micrometers. Now, if you're not familiar, to do this, we need to multiply by 1,000 because there's 1,000 micrometers in a millimeter. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Okay, now I've highlighted here how you change from millimeters to micrometers. We're timesing by 1,000. And micrometers to millimeters, we're dividing by 1,000. If you need to write that down, feel free, pause the video. Okay, here we go. So we changed our 0.05 millimeters, times it by 1,000. It gives us 50 micrometers. And it asked us for a ratio. So our bacterial cell is 1 micrometer. Our mesophyll cell is 50 micrometers. So our ratio is 1 to 50. Okay, and that is 2 marks altogether. So if you manage to do that calculation, you get 2 marks. And then the other bits are 3 and 2. So that's 7 marks altogether on prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So our takeaways are: learn how to change micrometers to millimeters and back again. Does come up in the microscope video as well. And learn the characteristics of prokaryotes and eukaryotes. And once you've done that, you should be able to tackle any question. Well done. See you on the next one.